Welcome back everyone. For today's video we are going to be taking a look at the play-in for the Champions Chess Tour AI Cup 2023. Now this is the last event of a series of 6 events being held on chess.com, featuring many prominent players like myself, Magnus, Carlsen, and others. Now if you play in Division 1 and you win the event, finish second or third, you automatically qualify for the next event. But it's not easy to do that, and in fact the last time I played in Division 1 of the Champions Chess Tour, which I believe was the Chess Kids Cup, I lost very soundly in the first 2 matches, so I did not automatically re-qualify for future events. As such, I'm playing in the play-in today. It was an event that had 170 players with 9 rounds of 10 minutes plus 2-second increment. Now I was very fortunate that after all was said and done of the 9 rounds of the 10 plus 2, I did finish in the top 8. So what does that mean? It means that there are 4 players who are automatically qualified for Division 1. Jan Nepomniachtchi, who won Division 2 last event, automatically gets promoted to Division 1. You have Denis Lazovic, the rising Belarusian player, who finished in 3rd place, Alireza Firouzja, who finished runner-up, and of course Magnus Carlsen. So all 4 of those players are automatically guaranteed to play in the next event. And then you have the 8 players, the top 8 players, who play individual matches to fill out the remaining 4 spots. So I finished in 8th place, and what this means is I go into the match format playing as none other than Dmitry Andreikin, the very talented Russian player. Now format very straightforward. We play 2 games of 10 minutes plus 2-second increment. If the match is tied 1-1, you will have an Armageddon game. So let's jump right into the action. Now first game of the 2-game match, I'm playing with the black pieces, and the game starts out with d4. I play knight to f6, c4, e6, knight to f3, and now I decide to play b6, which is the classic Queen's Indian defense. Now this is an opening that I've played very sparingly. I played it in 2016 during the FIDE Candidates tournament in Moscow, Russia. It did not go very well for me, but recently I also picked up the opening once again for the FIDE World Cup, which was held in Baku, Azerbaijan. So after b6 we get g3, bishop b7, bishop g2, and now I play this move bishop to b4, bishop to d2. We trade the bishops, and now I castle. Now it's a very simple opening to play here, because what you're trying to do is develop this knight from b8 via d7, something like d6, knight d7, and then maybe c5. Also knight e4 ideas exist as well, and you're trying to stop white from claiming the whole center. So when Andreikin plays knight c3 here, I play knight to e4, and the reason is simple. If I play a move like d6, for example, after queen c2, knight bd7, and e4, white gets this massive center with these 3 pawns on c4, d4, and e4, and white has a small advantage. Now black is still probably okay after a move like c5, but white is better. So here I play knight to e4, trying to trade off these knights, because after the knights get traded in white castles, I can simply play d6 with ideas like knight d7 and knight f6, and white doesn't really have a way to push the e pawn forward. If you move the knight, I simply trade the bishops, and here, even though white gets the big white center with the 3 pawns, after a move like e5, black is doing completely fine, because if white goes d5, you have knight c5, let's just say queen c2, and now you have a5 stopping b4, and you've got this great bastion, as well as a classic flying v formation. So Andreikin plays queen c2, I play knight takes knight, and now there's a nasty little trick with knight to g5, which creates some serious threats. First of all, there's a threat of checkmate on h7 with the knight on g5 and the queen on c2. Additionally, white is threatening to win the bishop on b7 and the rook on a8. So here the only move that I can play is knight to e4, because if I go queen takes g5 after bishop takes bishop, now the rook is under attack and the knight is under attack as well. I can play knight to c6, for example, but after bishop takes a8, knight takes e2, white can take the knight, not bishop takes c6, because then you have knight takes d4, forking the queen and the bishop. And after queen takes e2 in this position, when I play rook takes a8, white can play rook to d1, and even though I have a knight and pawn for the rook, white is significantly better. So here I play the move knight to e4, and now Andreikin captures with the knight. Now most of you are probably wondering, well wait, why can't white play bishop takes knight here, hitting the bishop and threatening mate as well? And the reason is that now after bishop takes bishop, queen takes bishop, it looks like white is winning the game due to the dual threats of mate on h7 and the rook hanging on the corner on a8. But after queen takes g5, queen takes a8, sacking the rook, knight to c6, queen to b7, and knight takes d4. The theory shows that black is completely fine here, even though you sacrifice a rook because you get a knight and a pawn in return for the rook. White can't really castle without losing a second pawn, and you're threatening to fork with knight c2, and you have queen a5 check, creating the classic right triangle as well. So all these ideas mean that black is doing quite well. So Andreikin captures with the knight, and now I play knight to c6. Important move here, because if I play d6, now knight to f6 check, creating the fossil, will win material after queen takes knight, bishop takes bishop, knight d7, takes, and e3, and white simply has a rook for a knight and should win the game. So here I play knight to c6, stopping any fossils with knight f6 or knight g5. Draken plays queen c3, guarding the pawn on d4. Here I play knight to a5, trying to put pressure on c4 while opening up this long diagonal and intending to play either f5 or d5 and hit the knight on e4. So here on Draken castles, if white were to play a move like b3, by the way, this would lose to f5, because now if you play knight f6, I take and the knight simply guards the bishop and I have an extra horse. Additionally, if you move the knight just away, for example, that hangs the bishop on g2 and it's GG, why not? So in this position on Draken castles, now I play f5, knight to d2, and I swap the bishops on g2 and play this move c5. Now here it's a very strange position because I have these weird little pawn chains, this chain of 3 from d7 to f5, but also a7 to c5. Now the big drawback in this position after the pawn trade is that I have this weakness on d7, so I do have to be very careful about how I play in the center of the board. So Draken plays rook d1, I go queen c7, he plays knight f3, and now I play this move rook a d8, simply guarding the pawn on d7. Draken plays rook d3 with the idea of creating the double stack and putting massive pressure on this pawn on d7. So here I go d6, rook f d1, and now I play this move knight to b7, protecting the pawn on d6. So the double stack really isn't doing a whole lot. Here Draken plays knight g5. Now it's worth noting that I should have probably played h6 first to stop knight g5, but I was worried about moves like b4 or even a3 and b4 as well. So I go knight b7, we get knight g5. I play rook d to e8 because now the knight is simply guarding the pawn, and I want the rooks on these two files, the e and f files in particular. Draken plays knight h3, and now I play this very committal move e5. Now this was a very tough decision for me. Obviously playing with a 10 minute plus 2 second increment. I have 3 extra minutes on the clock, and I had to decide, do I want to play a move like e5 to stop knight f4 or not? Now the drawback to playing e5 like in the game is it loosens up this e5 square, and also now the pawn on d6 can never be pushed forward, whereas at some point maybe I can still push d5, but once I go e5, I'm yielding this d5 square, and I'm really hoping this knight cannot magically get there. Now the reason I played e5 is essentially because if I had played a move like h6 after knight to f4, if I go e5, white gets this bastion with the knight on d5, and if I don't play e5, the knight is always putting pressure on his pawn on e6, and maybe I can play something like g5, but this is also very committal because after knight g6, suddenly there are these big threats with queen h8. So it's very hard to judge whether I should play e5 or not, but I decided let's just play e5. I keep a big time advantage and let's move forward. So after e5, Draken plays rook to d5. Now I go rook to f6, basically activating the rook here and protecting the pawn on d6. Here we get knight to g5, and now I play h6. We get knight to f3, and now I play this move knight to d8, which is a mistake. Now the computer really wants this move f4, and the reason is actually quite straightforward. I've got this rook on this f file, so I'm trying to open it up, but I also have the rook on the e file, so I can push e4 and use these rooks and put massive pressure on the center of the board. And already here the computer thinks that black is quite a bit better, because if white tries to go knight d2 and create the bastion on e4, pressuring all the pawns on the rook, now I can just go e4, and the rooks are perfectly placed here. I can bring the queen to f7 or e7. A lot of pressure on the e and f files, and black is significantly better. Instead, I play knight to d8 here, simply trying to avoid any major complications and hoping to reroute my knight to c6 and maybe jump to either d4 or b4 from the square. So Draken plays b4, which is an excellent move in this position, and now I play this move c takes b4 after about a 50-second thing, and this is, I think, a serious mistake. Now the move itself is okay, as the computer will point out, but what I probably should have played here was something like knight to e6 here, and the reason this move is so good is that if white takes, I can take back, and I've got this nice bastion with the knight on c5 and the pawns protecting it, and if white tries to gobble on d6, I have the fossil with knight to f4 check, pawn takes knight, rook takes rook, and white still is probably in the game in this endgame after knight e5, but after cb4, queen c2, and something like g5, black should have the advantage. Instead, I decided to take. Draken captures, and now I play this move knight to f7 immediately, and this is a huge mistake. Now the reason this is a huge mistake is when you look at the texture of the clock, I'm simply ahead by 2 minutes at this point, but once I play knight f7 and c5 happens, all of my moves become very difficult and all of my opponent's moves become very easy. I initially wanted to play knight b7 here, but I was very worried about queen to a4 hitting the rook and the pawn, and if I play rook to a8, I was worried about c5, knight takes pawn, queen c4, and now again there's a classic right triangle, all kinds of threats here, and after king h7, knight takes e5, white I thought was a little bit better. But the problem is, even here after in this position with knight e5, I can potentially play a move like rook to e8, knight to f3, and then maybe queen to e7 with some pressure, and I'm still holding all the critical squares. But when I play knight to f7, now Andrakin is able to play c5. He has the double stack on the d file as well as the kebab incoming, and my moves just are not easy. So I trade the pawns. I go queen e7. Now Andrakin plays queen c4, and the big issue is the white has all the heavy pieces on the D and the C files, both files which white controls, and there's a pin as well, and it's all just very, very hard to play. So here I go queen e6. Andrakin trades, plays rook d7, creating the kebab on the 7th. Important move, by the way, because if white plays rook c7, I can play rook 8 e7, and after rook d7 takes rook a6. This should be completely fine for me. But the problem is that when Andrakin plays rook d7, if I play rook 8 e7 hoping for the same line with the trade in rook a6, white can throw in a little tickle with rook c8 check, king h7, rook to c7, and now after the trade, suddenly the knight and the pawn are under attack and white is simply winning. So here I decide to play a6. Andrakin creates a double stack, and now I go rook f6, and he plays this move h4. Now the problem with the position, as I alluded to before, is that here, even though I have an extra minute, Andrakin has a double stack. His moves are always going to be a reaction to whatever I do. If I play e4, the knight jumps to d4. If I play f4, there's g4, g5, and so whatever I do, all of his moves can be played instantly, and he does not have to use any time. So even though I have a 1 minute time advantage here, I'm in a lot of trouble. So I play e4 in the game. Andrakin goes knight d4. I go f4, trying to maybe play f3, trying to create some space here, and here Andrakin plays g4. Now I go g6 here, stopping knight to f5. If white plays g5, I can simply take, and after rook g7, I can go king to f8, and white has no checks or rook h7 because of the knight on g5. So Andrakin plays a4, and now I play this move f3, which is a big mistake. Now again, I'm still up a little bit of time here, but f3 was essentially based on a miscalculation. If I'd used maybe a little bit more time, perhaps I would have realized that I could have played knight e5, forking the pawn and the rook. And as scary as this looks after rook to g7 in this position, I can simply play king to h8, rook h7, king g8, and if white plays rook g7, I just go king f8, no checkmate. If you move the rook away, I simply go back to g8. Now maybe this is still losing after h5, for example, but it gets very messy with f3 here, and I would have had some chances to save the game. Instead, I play f3. Andrakin trades, he takes the pawn, and now I play rook to f4, trying to hit the pawns on g4 as well as a4, but this is simply a bad move. What I should have played here was rook to e4, trying to attack both the pawns at the same time on g4 and a4, and after king g3, maybe I have rook e4 with the double stack, and after rook c8, king g7, knight e5, maybe I can still take the pawn and survive. At any rate, I'm not sure if this is actually surviving, but I have some chances. Instead, when I play rook to f4, now Andrakin plays king g3. I play rook e4, thinking that here I'm going to win the pawn on g4 or a4. If white moves the knight, I can take the pawn, and just like that, I should be fine. And if white plays g5, I can go check, king h2, rook f4 back. And again, I think I have very, very good chances to draw the game. Unfortunately, Andrakin has enough time, and he's able to calculate that he can play rook c8 check, king g7, and now the beautiful move, knight to e5, and the knight is pinned on f7, and if I take with the rook, I lose the rook on f4, and after knight to e5, these rooks are simply stuck on the 4th rank. There are no threats whatsoever. My king and knight are pinned, and it's just totally hopeless. So I play rook f6. Andrakin trades everything off, plays rook c7. I go king f8, rook to c6 here. Unfortunately, I can't go king f6 after check rook e6. White can simply trade and go king to f4, and with the 3-on-2 on the king side, it's a very routine king and pawn victory. So I go king f8. Andrakin plays rook c6. I take, he takes, I play h5, and now Andrakin plays a nice move, pawn to f3. Now white probably is winning after g takes h5, but as some of you may know and others definitely don't know, there is an endgame here where basically if you reach this position, this endgame is actually a theoretical draw, even though white has 2 extra pawns. Think of it as like bowling, where you have the split pawns, but they're really, really close here. And if it's an edge pawn, like an H and an F pawn, or A and C pawns, for example, this is a theoretical draw. So when I play h5, I'm hoping that Andrakin will take, and now he has the h and the f. With the 3 pawns versus the 2 pawns, this probably is winning, but it could get a little bit tricky. So Andrakin plays f3, so now if I ever trade, white has the 2 connected pawns to simply push up the board. Here I go a5, we get rook a6, I play king g7, again really hoping that Andrakin will take the pawn on h5. but he plays g5. I go rook a3, king to f4, a4, and now he goes king e4. And the main problem here is that white can hide the king on f5 with the pawn on f4, and it's totally hopeless. Additionally, if we reach this endgame with takes and rook a1, for example, after h5, a5, rook a6, a4, king h4, a3, king g5, a2, for example, white can simply go h6 here, and this is very similar to the rook and pawn endgame that was played in the first rapid game of the 2018 World Chess Championship match between Fabiano Caruana and Magnus Carlsen. So we get this position after king e4. I play rook a1, king f5, I go a3, rook a7, play king f8, and here I resign the game in view of the fact that white has many ways to win. Probably the simplest one is king f6, threatening mate in 1, and after king to e8, g6. If I play rook to f1, white can simply take the pawn and guard the pawn on f3. If I play a2, there's g7, rook g1, rook takes a2, followed by rook to a8 and g8, making a queen, and white will win the game. So in this position, I play king f8 and resign. Very, very unhappy with this first game, and I fall behind 1-0. So what does this mean? This means in the second game with the white pieces, I am now in a must-win situation. If I do not win this game, Andrejkin will move on to Division 1, and I will move on to Division 2. So I play knight to f3, trying to play something slow. Normally when I played e4 against Andrejkin in the past, he tends to play this Petrov or Russian defense here with knight to f6, which is extremely solid. So I go knight f3, knight f6, b3, we get d5, and now I play this unusual move c4. Now what I probably should have done was just played e3, but for some reason I was a little bit on autopilot. I don't want to say I was tilted necessarily, but I wasn't quite there, and I simply forgot that after c4, d4, when I play e3, Andrejkin does not have to play c5. I was really hoping that Andrejkin would go c5, and then I thought maybe I've got this weird bishop a3 move, and after e6 takes bishop f8, king f8, and d3, at least I'm going to get the classic Ben-Oni structure with the pawns on d3 and c4 versus the pawn on d4. But much to my horror, Andrejkin immediately plays knight c6, and just like that, I realize I'm in a lot of trouble. Now, I spent quite a bit of time before playing d3 here, and the reason is simple. I can probably trade the pawns on trade the pawns and the knights on d4 and go knight c3, but after bishop to f5 here, or even c6 stopping the knight b5 idea, Black's moves are too obvious. He's going to go bishop f5, e6, maybe bishop c5, maybe bishop b4, maybe even simply castling queenside, and Black will play all of his moves pretty much instantly and not have to burn time. So in a must-win situation, I realized that, like, this is not what I can go for, or what I shouldn't go for, I should say. So I play d3. Andrejkin plays e5, and now I play e4, and this just looks frankly ridiculous. I've played e2 to e3 and then e3 to e4. I've simply wasted tempo, or one move, just moving the pawn to e4, because I played e3, e4 in 2 turns versus e4 in 1 go. But on the flip side, because this is a situation where I must win the game to stay in the match, it really doesn't matter. Anything goes, and you just keep playing the position. So here we get bishop b4. I block with the bishop. Andrejkin plays bishop g4. I go bishop e2, and now he decides to trade the bishop for the knight on f3. Now this whole sequence with bishop g4 and bishop f3 I think is okay, but probably if I were playing this position, I would have done it a little bit differently. I would have actually left the bishop on g4 and played something like knight to d7 potentially. I guess knight d7 might blunder knight d4 maybe, but something like this to me felt a little bit simpler than what he does, because after we trade the bishops and he goes queen e7, I play a3. Idea to play for b4. He goes a5. I castle. He castles. Now I can play g3, and even though Black's a little bit better because of the structure, it's very easy for me to play because I have two ideas. I want to either move the bishop to g2 and play for f4, maybe even something like opening up the long diagonal here, or potentially I can do something like f5 and go for the pawn storm on the king side, very similar to a King's Indian defense. So I have this idea. Additionally, the other option that I have is to try and play b4 and expand on the queen side. Now for this reason, it's very easy for me to play in this position. I don't really have to worry about a whole lot because I know what the ideas are. So Andrejkin plays knight d7. I go queen c2, plays knight c5, puts this great knight on c5, targeting both the pawns on b3 and d3. I go bishop g2, and now he plays this move rook to a6, intending to play rook b6 and put as much pressure as he humanly can on these two pawns on b3 and d3 specifically. Additionally, down the road after f4, there are ideas where maybe Black can even trade, move the knight away, and then swing the rook all the way over to h6, or maybe even g6 potentially. Either way, there's some options. So after rook a6, I play f4 anyway. We get rook b6. I play king h1. He goes rook d8, and now I play rook f3, simply hoping to bring my other rook to the f file and crash through if possible. We get rook d6, I go rook f1, rook f6, I play queen to d1 here. We get knight d7, and now I play this move bishop h3, trying to activate the bishop on this long diagonal. We get knight to f8, and now I go queen c1, guarding the pawn on a3. Now already here I'm feeling pretty good about my position because the knight is no longer on c5 where it was pressuring the pawns on b3 and d3. Additionally, the knight holds the pawn on b3, queen on c1 holds the pawn on a3, and the bishop is always scoping this diagonal, so it's not so easy to get the knight back to c5. So we get rook h6, I play bishop c8, knight a7, I go to f5, knight c6, play rook f2, we get rook f6, and now I play this move bishop c8 again. We get knight g6 here, and I go bishop f5. And here Andreykin makes a very peculiar decision to trade the pawns on f4. I was expecting Andreykin to play knight to f8 and ask me, what am I going to do? Am I going to play c5? Am I going to try to play b4? What are my plans exactly? Because this bishop on f5 is in the way of the double stack. So if I ever trade, this bishop prevents any pressure on the f file. And so I was very surprised when Andreykin traded the pawns here, because now after the pawn trade, suddenly it becomes very hard for black to play and very easy for white to play. So Andreykin plays knight h4, I go bishop to h3, we get rook h6, and now I play this move rook to g1, trying to use this open g file. Andreykin plays knight g6, I go rook g3, protecting both the pawns on d3 as well as the bishop on h3, and preparing to maybe create some kind of double stack on either the g or the f files. Here Andreykin plays queen h4, and now I blunder with queen f1. Now what's funny about this moment is the game, as I was live streaming this on my Kick channel, and it's pretty much as soon as I played queen f1 I was like, wait a second, maybe I could have gone queen to g1, because I have a very simple idea here, which is that if black moves a knight, I go f5, and suddenly the double stack is crashing through on the g file. And if black plays queen f6, for example, there's e5, let's just say queen e7, and after f5 there's rook g7, rook g8, and this is simply a winning position. Instead, I played queen f1 here pretty quickly, a little bit hasty, but again, as you can tell from the clock, I was up about a minute and a half, and so I'm trying to put as much pressure as I can on the clock as well as the board. So here Andreykin plays knight ce7, and now I play this move knight to f3. Apparently b4 is supposed to be winning, because after takes, if rook b4, now knight f3, queen f6, and f5 is apparently winning. Don't ask me why, because knight e5 I have rook a2 and rook a8 going for the classic ice skater. Again, way too deep for a puny human like myself, but the computer thought this was really good. So instead I play knight f3, we get queen to f6, not queen takes f4 by the way, because then I have knight g5, and suddenly I've got this massive pressure on the f and the g file. Let's say black goes queen to h4, I can play rook takes f7, and mate is almost unstoppable here, because if black plays a move like queen g3 for example, I have rook f8 sacking the rook, and after knight takes I go queen f7 check, king h8, queen f8, knight g8, and then knight f7 with the classic smothered checkmate. So Andreykin plays queen f6 here, realizing that taking the pawn is not possible, but now this nasty move knight to e5, and there are all kinds of threats with knight g4 forking the queen and the rook, but also knight d7 forking the other rook and the queen as well. So here Andreykin plays rook takes b3. The computer thinks that after rook takes h3, knight to d7, and queen to c6 for example, queen h3, rook b3, white is still better after rook f1, but it's very, very murky because there is f5 and the pin on both the from both the queen to the king on e4 and h1, as well as this pin on the third rank from this rook towards the pawn, the queen, and the rook, make it very, very hard to play. Andreykin instead plays rook takes b3. I go knight g4, forking the queen and the rook. We get queen h4, I take the rook, he takes back, I play a4 here, simply trying to keep an extra pawn on the board. We get rook to a3, I play bishop d7, activating the bishop and guarding the pawn. Also f5, f6, as well as rook to h3 exist in the position. We get rook to c3, I play rook to g1, Andreykin goes queen h4, and now I play queen g2, lining up the double stack the other way, and the threat of f5 is very, very dire. Andreykin plays queen h6, I go queen g3, simply guarding both of the pawns on f4 and d3. Andreykin plays knight f8, play bishop e8, g6, and now I play f5, and now I'm finally crashing through on the f file. The game concludes with queen e3, I play rook to f3, queen to e2, I swap on g6, takes with the knight. If he were to take with the pawn, I can go bishop f7 check, king g7, king h8, queen e5 is checkmate, and after queen to e5, king to h6, I have rook h3 check, queen h5, takes, and queen g5 checkmate once again. So here Draken plays knight f takes g6. I go bishop takes f7, king h8. I trade the bishop for the knight, and now I have a beautiful sequence with queen to e5, sacking the queen for free. But if black takes the queen here, there's rook f8 checkmate because the king cannot go to the g file. And after king g8, I play queen e8 check, king g7, and queen to f8 is checkmate because of the pin on the G file, and the rook on f3 guards the queen, and that's all she wrote. So I win a huge second game to tie the match but one, and we go to Armageddon. Now in Armageddon, both players, on Draken and myself, bid for the time that we want. It's a 10-minute game with no increment, so whoever bids lower will choose the black piece and draw odds. And I decided to bid 6 minutes and 59 seconds, essentially yielding my opponent a 3-minute and 1 second advantage going into the game. So I bid 60.59. I win the bid. I have the black pieces, but if I draw or win, I'm through. If I lose, I am going to division 2. So Draken plays d4. I play knight f6, and we get the same opening here. We get another Queen's Indian. Pretty straightforward with this setup here with knight c3, knight e4 takes, knight g5, knight e4 takes, and now I go knight c6. Now here it's a little bit different because the white queen is on d3 versus being on c3 or c2. So on Draken castles, I play f5, knight c3, knight to b4, attacking the queen, and here we get queen d2. I swap and I play the move knight to c6. Now very similar to the first game of the match, but the big difference is I'm not playing c5 and trying to clarify the structure immediately. So we get rook d1. I play queen f6, get f4, and now I go rook a d8. Here Draken plays e4. We trade, and I play the move queen g6. Now I don't really like Draken's approach in an Armageddon game because the big issue with him playing f4 and e4 is that it allows me to play a lot of very quick moves. And as you can tell at this point in time, I've used about 29 seconds. Draken's already used about 1.5 minutes, and a lot of my moves are very easy, like knight e7, knight f5, h6. All my moves are pure reaction, so I was feeling very, very good at this point in the game. So Draken plays d5. I take on d5. He goes rook e1. I play rook d8. Now, probably I should have used a little bit less time to capture the pawn. Instead, I ended up using about 40 seconds. So I was also looking at h6, knight f3, and ed5 here. So I take, we get rook e1, rook e8, guarding the knight on e7, cd5. I play knight to f5. Draken goes knight f3, and now I play this move d6, trying to stop knight e5. But pretty much as soon as I played this move, those of you guys are watching the stream probably noticed I went a little bit quiet, and that's because there was this move knight g5 back with the intention of creating a great bastion on e6 here, and the knight is very hard to dislodge. Now computer thinks after rook f7 black is okay, but nonetheless it feels difficult to play. So Draken plays queen c3. Now I go h6, stopping the knight from going to g5. If knight goes to d4, obviously I'll trade, and as such, white can never really get this knight to e6 anymore. Additionally, if white were to play queen takes pawn, there's knight e3, forking the king and the rook, and I will have no difficulties whatsoever. So Draken plays king f2. I play queen f7. He plays queen d3. I go queen f6. He plays b3, and now I make a big mistake by playing this move g5. Now this move is objectively okay, as you'll see from the evaluation bar, but nonetheless what it does is it creates a situation where my moves become difficult and there are some imbalances in the pawn structure. What I probably should have done in retrospect was played something like queen to f7 here and just sat on the position and waited for Draken to do something. Very specifically, if Draken trades, I take. If he goes like rook e1, I can just trade and go knight e7 and win the pawn. And if he plays something like king g2, again I can play something like queen f6, maybe queen g6 as well, but I just sit and wait, and it's on Draken to prove the advantage versus me complicating the situation. Unfortunately, when I played g5 in this game, I simply missed Draken's next move, which was this move g4. Already here, I thought that if he takes on g5 after takes, there's an open f file, a lot of pressure here. If he trades the rooks, of course, I simply take and infiltrate with either rook e3 or knight e3, and I thought at this point I'm completely safe. But there's this move g4, which I realized pretty much as soon as I played g5, and now after knight to h4, we get pawn to f5. I trade on f3, and white is trying to play rook e6 and really create a nice bastion or an outpost on this e6 square. So here I go rook e5 to stop rook e6. Draken trades the rooks and plays this move queen e2. Now the big problem with this position here for me with the black piece is that Draken's moves are easy to play. He tries to play against the backwards pawn on c7. He has the protected pass pawn in the endgame as well, and it makes it very, very hard to play. So here I go rook e8. Draken trades and he plays rook c1, and now I play this horrible move, rook takes d5. Now what I probably should have played here was rook to e7, guarding the pawn, and the reason I didn't play this is because I was worried about this move, rook to c4. If I play king to f7, if white goes rook e4, this is actually draw after the trade in a6, because white simply has no way to enter on the queen side here. If you go b4 b5, I go a5, no entry here. And if you go a4, king f7, a5, b5, again, there's simply no entry. I just wait with the king on f7 and f6. But what I was concerned about was rook to a4 here, because if I play a5, now rook to e4 is actually winning, because if I trade the rooks and go king f6, white can run this king over. If I wait on f7, now the king gets in via b5 and c6, and it's a complete disaster. I'll lose a bunch of pawns, and with it I lose the game, all because this pawn is on a5 and I can't put it on this a6 square. So I was very, very worried about that, which is why I didn't do this. But as it turns out, after rook a4, maybe king f6, rook a7, and h5, h3, takes, and king e5 is still enough for a draw with the active king. But it's very, very hard to play this with limited time. So I sort of panic here, and instead I take the pawn on d5. And now after rook takes c7, this endgame is actually close to lost, because white has this great rook on the 7th rank. My king is very passive, and I'm gonna have a very hard time defending. So here I go rook a5, Draken plays king e4, an excellent move here because the pawn on a2 doesn't matter, since white can go king d5, and all white needs here is after rook h2 is to bring the king to this g6 square, and white is completely winning here because I can't check this king. And if I play rook e8 f6, let's just say rook e8, there's check, king f8, rook h7, threatening rook h8, and after king g8, f7, king f8, rook h8, white wins the game. So I suddenly realized in this position that's very, very hard to play. So I play h5 instead. Draken plays h3, which I think is a good move. G takes h5 maybe is winning, but you don't really want to allow this endgame with the split pawns, because after rook a7 and g4, suddenly it looks like black will be back in the game. So Draken plays h3, we trade. Also, the reason Draken likes the structure is because now it's a 2v1. So if white can ever win this pawn, just to illustrate the point, you have these two connected pawns once again running up the board. So we trade. I take on a2, Draken plays king d5, I go rook e2 to stop this king e6 f6 g6 maneuver. He captures on a7, I play b5, plays rook b7, I play king f8, he takes on d6. Important move, because if white were to take on b5 after king f7, king f6, maybe I still have some chances to save the game. So he takes on d6, I go rook e4, plays f6 here. Now f6 is completely fine. Probably king d5 would have been, I think, a little bit easier, although maybe I can still take here, because after king e5 there's some rook f4, king f6, and king e8. But even this looks very, very close to losing after rook takes b5. Maybe I have some chance with g4, g3, but it looks very hard to play. Instead, Draken plays f6, I go b4 here, plays king d5, and now I have to play rook e3. As much as I'd love to take on g4, after king e6, rook e4, king f5, once again, this idea with king g6 is simply winning for white, because there's no check on g1, because the pawn shields the king. If I don't have this pawn on g5, for example, this is probably close to a draw. Maybe it's still losing, but I always have these checks on g1 or on the e1 square to force the king away. But because I have this very bad pawn on g5, the king just intends to hide behind the pawn, and I will lose the endgame. So here I play rook e3, Draken takes. Now at least I get king f7, and after rook b6, king g6, I'm trying to go rook g3 and win the pawn on g4 and maybe push the g pawn up the board. Draken plays b4, I go rook g3, and now he plays king e6, an excellent move here, because after rook takes g4, there's this move king to e7 with the idea of playing f7 check and then f8 queen, winning the game. So here I go rook f4. If I could play rook e4, I would, but after rook to e6 here, it's simply winning. So if I take, there's f7, f8, and if I go rook f4, now white goes b5, g4, b6, g3, b7. I am way too slow with the g pawn versus the b pawn. So I play rook f4, Draken goes rook e6. Excellent move, maybe the only winning, I guess it's not the only winning move, because you can also invert the order with b5, but an excellent move here because the rook e6 shields against rook e4 check, and you can always bring the rook backwards in a couple of moves. So I go g4, b5, and now I play this move king to h7 here, trying to drop the king back so that f7 will not be a check. Draken plays b6, and now I go g3. It's worth pointing out that if I play g3 here, white has rook to e3, hitting the pawn. If I take, check, king f5, rook f3 wins the game. And if I play rook g4, f7, g2, white surely as a checkmate would say queen, queen, and then rook e6. If king g5, there's queen f6 and queen h6. And if I go to h7, there's rook h6 mate as well. So I play king h7, b6, and now I go g3, and here Andrakin blunders away the game with this move b7. Here, if Andrakin had played the move rook to e3, I would have had to resign the game, essentially because if I go g2, white can check, go check on g3, and simply capture the pawn, and with the 2 pawns and the king cut off, very easy win for white. Instead, Andrakin plays b7, and now after this move rook to b4, I am miraculously saving the game here. And the reason is quite straightforward. White is losing this b pawn, but along with losing the b pawn, my g pawn is 2 squares away from queening. So here when Andrakin plays f7, I play rook takes b7, king to f6, and now I can play this move g2, and here white has no way to win. If you go rook e1 stopping the pawn, I will just start checking the king all over the board, and you can't really ever dodge the checks wherever you go. And if you go to e6, I can even go king to g7 and slide the king to f8 and draw the game quite easily. So Andrakin decides to promote to a queen, but now after I promote to a queen, white has no way to win. There are no checks on the 6th rank here, and after rook to e7 check, which is the only check that exists, I trade the rooks and go king to h8. My queen on g1 covers the mate on g7, and white has no way to win. The game concludes after queen e8, queen g8, check block, check block, check block, and now Andrakin trades the queens again after queen e8, queen g8. If white were to play a move like queen e7, covering the 2 checks on g7 or f8, I can simply go queen g1 once again, and the game would end in a draw. So Andrakin trades the queens, and I survive very barely survive, I should say, and I do end up drawing the game. As such, I do advance to Division 1, where in the first round, I will be playing against none other than the former 5-time world chess champion, Magnus Carlsen. So, on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap of the play-in of my games from this very brutal qualifier for the Chess Champions Tour AI Cup, the 6th and final event of the Chess Champions Tour being held on chess.com. And I will be back soon with some more great YouTube-only recaps. I don't know if you guys could hear the thunder, but there is a lot of thunder, so I'm probably going to end right now before I lose power and I lose all the work that I just did for you guys. So I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to smash that subscribe button below, and I'll be back very soon. See you guys. Bye.